Are you looking for Christmas card ideas that save you time and don't leave you with a pile of scraps? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. Today I'm going to be sharing a 6x6 paper busting template. So one 6x6 paper will make 3 A2 size cards with no scraps, no pattern paper scraps left over. And this is a template that you can download at jesscrafts.com. So if you want to use it, you'll be able to easily print it off and recreate these cards with whatever paper you have on hand. I will also be working with a stamp set from Simon Hurley Create and Ranger, and then the coordinating dies from Spellbinders, and thank you to Spellbinders for sending these to me to work with. And I'm going to start with the fact that this particular stamp set has dies that cut out the words. I understand that this increases the cost of stamp or die sets, coordinating die sets, and I'm not someone who necessarily buys a whole bunch of coordinating die sets. But if I think it's going to be something where it will really be worth it, then I will spend that extra. And what I think is cool about the coordinating sentiments is that, especially in a set with this, like this, it has a lot of sentiments, is that I can actually save a lot of time by stamping and cutting multiples all at once, so that when I go to start making my holiday cards, I don't have to stop and stamp a sentiment on each one or think about where the sentiment's going to go, because I'm going to have a pile of these die cut sentiments. And you could of course do this with banner dies instead. So you could cut out a whole bunch of banners or tags. I have this Spellbinders tag set, and that's what I thought initially. Oh, I could cut a bunch of these smaller tags and these sentiments will fit on it. But with these sentiment dies, it's even faster. So I'm going to show you how to take some time out of making your sentiments. I started by picking the sentiments that I'm most likely to use on a card. I find that even a stamp set that I really love, there's usually a few things that I'm maybe not as likely to use. One of the sentiments says, "A gift for you." I think that's great for a tag. A lot of the cards I make aren't going to be accompanied by a gift because I'm going to donate them. And if you're interested in donating your cards, at jesscrafts.com, you can find resources for donating your cards, including a bunch of places that you can donate to, and jokes season specific and topic specific that you can include in your cards in case you're like, I don't know what to write inside of a card, but I would love to bless others with my cards. So I picked out the sentiments I am most likely to use, and then I'm going to die cut them, and I've put this tape on top of them so they don't, shift everywhere. We're going to take that same tape that we had just used to hold down our dies, and we're going to just place it on top. Now, what I like to do when I do this is actually, because I made a mistake right there, is I want it to be sticking through the die, or sorry, I want it to cover the die most of the way, not all of the way, because if it covers the die all the way, it's a lot harder to get the die back out, or the die cut back out. So if I were to place this die cut inside, let me find one then. I have tape on. Okay, so now it's going to be a lot easier to remove that because it's not all the way stuck down. But also this is an extremely low tack tape. This is from scrapbook.com, but Post-it note tape is also really low tack, and something like that makes it easier to remove but yet holds them down long enough for you to do your stamping. I'm going to fit each of my die cuts back into the slot that they went, and they'll be held down by the temporary or the low tack adhesive we put behind it. And then I'm going to start lining up each of the stamps. I like to line them up one at a time and then close my stamp press. Now, I'm going to talk about how this is useful if you don't have a stamp press as well, and about how if you prefer to stamp and then cut, how you could also make that a little bit easier. But I like this method because it means that I could come back to this. So I could store this with my stamps and dies, and then the next time I want to use it next year, this is going to still be helpful. My other method where you stamp first and then die cut is not something that's as useful year to year. I really like to stamp in colored ink as opposed to black ink. Black ink is probably gonna go with pretty much anything, but if I don't have any other black going on in the card, which in a Christmas card, I'm unlikely to, although there are like gorgeous black and gold Christmas cards out there, black and silver, black with metallic is like gorgeous at Christmas time. But I'm probably gonna use red on my cards, so I'm going to take a gamble and stamp some of these in red. But because I can do this just over and over again as many times as I want, I will also be able to stamp some in green. I can stamp some on different colored cardstock, etc., because it's just what I die cut out, because this jig will work with everything once. Some of you may be like, well, great, but I don't have a stamp platform. And this can still be helpful. One, even just holding down the die cuts while you stamp them can be helpful. And you could still kind of more mass produce this and not have to line up the die every time. So anyway, what I would do is line up a few of them. Maybe not as many. I'm doing 4 instead of 7. Make sure your stamps are conditioned. You pick an ink that you feel like comfortable will stamp well the first time, because when you are stamping with a stamp block instead of a stamp positioner, you usually just get one shot at it, which is often enough. I really like inks that have a bit of pigment in them, like a VersaFine Clair ink can be great for, you have to stamp like one time. But because I have a MISTI, I don't actually have those. I just have one black VersaFine ink. Okay, I might have to get my head in the way to line this up. And this is a little bit less perfect, of course, because I'm still looking through the block and trying to line them up, but I'm getting 4 stamped at once, hopefully, and they should, if one is lined up, the rest hopefully should be as well. And there you go. My last iteration of this tip is if you prefer to stamp first and then die cut. So I have loaded up my stamps in my MISTI. So again, just gonna ink them up. Just doing red and white for this whole tutorial to get the idea across, but of course, so many options opened up. Now, you don't want to take these out of your stamp positioner until you've gotten all of them, because their placement is going to matter. So you're going to want to stamp a whole bunch of them at one time. Definitely just do this with the stamp block as long as you don't keep moving them off, because basically, as long as every time I stamp, they're like the same distance apart, this method will work. So now I've lined up my dies, and I'm going to use something a little bit more heavy duty in terms of tape. I don't want it to rip my paper, but I need it to be a little bit stickier than this low tack tape, which has many good purposes. But I'm going to use delicate surface FROGTAPE for this next bit. I'm going to basically connect all of my dies, and this way, the next time I stamp them all in the same place, I will be able to die cut all of them at the same time, and I'll demonstrate that. So I'm stamping them all back in the same place, and again, you could do this with a stamp block as long as you keep them on the stamp block and they're always going to be in the same position, because it's about their position relative to each other and not where they are on the page. And I'll demonstrate that for you. Also, make sure you give them a little bit of room, because you're going to have to fit the die around them. So if you're stamping them right next to each other, you won't be able to fit the dies in. So it is a little bit, I suppose, more wasteful of paper or cardstock than it might be, because you might be able to get them a little closer together if you were just doing single cuts at a time, but it's probably worth it for the amount of time you can save. So now I have these dies all attached relative to each other. Be very careful that none of them come off their position, because then they won't work for the second time through. If you get one kind of stuck like that, you can just kind of push on it from behind and it should be able to pop out. That delicate surface FROGTAPE has never damaged my die cuts before. And now I want to line it up. And now this, you're not going to save year to year the way you might save this year to year, but I don't know that there's actually that much of a time difference. It's a little bit more just what you personally prefer. I think because there's less lining up to do, you line up the stamps one time and then you can stamp endlessly. That's better than this method where you have to line up the dies each time you have a new sheet stamped. But, you know, there's probably other things that make it more or less difficult or time consuming as well. Now that we've established a whole bunch of ways we can make sentiments faster, let's get to the meat of making this card. And I'm going to use, as I said before, my 6x6 paper to busting template number 41, available at jesscrafts.com. I'm going to follow the cutting instructions. This is a 6x6 area, and it tells you all the little cuts that you're going to need to make to produce the 3 A2 size cards with no scraps. So I'm going to start by cutting at 2.5. This does work with directional pattern paper, so if the pattern paper you chose has a clear top and bottom, then you can still use this sketch. I, once again, and I've done this before, drew it wrong the first time so that it would have been confusing, but I have fixed it for you guys. And so then you cut that at 3. So you have 2.5 by 3, you have 2 of those. Eventually you're going to need 3 of those, because you're going to make 3 cards, so you'll need 3 of each one. Then I'm going to take this remaining 3.5 inch piece and 3.5 by 6, and I'm going to cut it to 3.5 by 3. This will become one more of my 2.5 pieces and a 1 by 3. So I have 3 of this. Now I need to make 3 of this. I have 3 by 3.5 here. And I'm going to be cutting that down to a 1 inch piece and another 1 inch piece. So I have my 3 by 1 inch pieces. Again, I'm just following the sketch. That's all you have to do. It tells you every little cut you need to make. But I like to walk through it a little bit more because many people have explained that that's helpful. So now I have a 3 by 1.5, and then I need to make each of these to 1 by 1.5. So I'm cutting off 1 inch until I have 3 of the same piece once again. The next thing I'm going to need to do is cut mats. And again, if you pick up the sketch at jesscrafts.com, it tells you exactly the size. The mats will produce scraps. You will have some cardstock scraps left. As I go to assemble the pieces of one of these cards, this mat from Altenew that I like to work on is going to help me to make sure everything is lined up. In the sketch, I kind of show the paper in the middle of the card. You could put it wherever you want, up and down from there. You can change up the orientation and that kind of thing, but for the purposes of this card, I think I actually might go a little bit higher because I do, eventually my thought is the ornaments from the stamp set are going to be hanging down. I'm going to talk also about how I make coloring these a lot faster. So I'm going to kind of bump it up a little bit above center, and I can line it up on each side with these lines on my grid mat. I like that this particular one from Altenew like just gives you an A2 size card, but really any old grid mat will do a lot to help this kind of thing be a bit straighter. It also kind of depends on your ability to cut things super precisely, which I am not always a master of. I have seen the basic design, like these 2 pieces, in sketches and stuff before, but I wanted to make it into a no scrap design, and it left me with this little piece here, but I actually think this piece is going to be quite an advantage because I think when I make this card, as I use my sketches many, many times, it's going to be always kind of a perfect place for a sentiment or something like that, whereas this side is really great for a bold, like, focal point. There's not much left to assembling this card, but I did want to talk about how you could color something more quickly so that you could color a bunch for Christmas cards, and it would look like you put a lot of time and detail into it, even though you've used this little bit faster method. So I have picked on my ornament the areas that I want to be green, red, and then the gold at the top. And I've picked several colors of yellow, green, and this is a red color, but it's definitely more of like a sort of pinky orange coral kind of red. But I've picked several colors, and I have them here in a marker bag so that I can keep them together as I color a few ornaments. And then I'm going to color the area that I want green with the lightest green. Then, and I'm using Copic markers, but you can use any kind of alcohol marker, and really like water-based markers I think would be fine with this as well, as long as you use that same philosophy of starting with the lightest color and then just adding darker colors on top of it. So I'm going to go in and add the darker leaves, and then it would cover up what's behind it. Similarly, I'm going to pick another but also darker color to then color this little detail so that it adds a lot of interest, but I'm not trying to take a color and color all around these leaves. I find working with any stamp that has like a really long straight piece like that and trying to get it straight can be quite tricky. So this is an instance where I definitely recommend making a jig again, just because then once you've positioned it and you finally lay it straight, you can stamp a whole bunch of them and maybe pick a color that you think would go on a lot of your, in this instance, Christmas cards. And so you could make, you know, once you really like it, I would probably just stamp 10, 20, however many you think you would use over the life of your stamp set so that you don't have to ever bother with that again. And then I'm going to attach that here. I like to, whenever possible, pull an element out of the bounds of a pattern design like this. So this box gives you like a clear area to put a focal point image, but if you keep everything within the bounds of these boxes, then it can make your card look a little boring. So I'm going to pull it outside of the bounds of the box by adding the ornament string all the way to the top of the pattern paper, and then it will look like it's extending off the card as well. If you found this video helpful, here is another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community. Subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.